So you want to buy an oil pipeline. This isn't a gas station, and it's certainly not a refinery. It's an oil pipeline. Thousands of miles of high-pressure steel buried underground, transporting crude oil in the dark, 24 hours a day, whether anyone cares or not. In this video, you'll learn what no one talks about when they talk about oil pipelines. The owners of oil pipelines aren't oil companies. They are not independent explorers, drillers, or builders. Pipeline owners are normally pension funds, insurance companies, and infrastructure investment managers, sitting in quiet offices in Toronto, Houston, and London, collecting commissions as the oil gets moved, in silence, without thinking, like a toll road you don't see. But the most telling part of the business is this: an oil pipeline doesn't give a shit about the price of oil. It charges a fee for every barrel that goes through. That's what the energy industry doesn't sell. There's the nerve-wracking business of finding oil and selling it. And then there's the completely different business of moving it. One is a wager. The other is more of a utility. And today, we're going to go over the one most people have never even thought of. By the end of this, you'll see why some of the most boring-sounding companies on the stock market are some of the most reliably profitable assets ever built. Subscribe if you're the type of person who feels they finally understand how the world really works. I'm working hard to bring you the best projects, and you don't want to miss any of them. First, the physical reality. Because it's really crazy, the US alone has some 2.6 million miles of pipeline infrastructure. That's enough to circle the Earth over 100 times. Some individual pipelines run for thousands of miles. The Trans-Alaska Pipeline is 800 miles long, through some of the most hostile terrain on the planet. The Colonial Pipeline, a 5,500-mile pipeline from Houston to New York, carries about 45% of all the fuel used on the east coast of the United States. Petrol, jet fuel, diesel, all of it moving along underground at 3 to 5 miles an hour. 3 to 5 miles an hour, slower than a brisk walk, moving the fuel that runs the eastern seaboard. The pipeline doesn't move fast because it doesn't need to. The volume is what matters. The Colonial Pipeline moves about 100 million gallons of fuel per day, every day, whether there's a hurricane, a market crash, or an election. The fuel moves. Now, what does a pipeline cost to build? A new large-diameter crude oil pipeline runs roughly $5 to $10 million per mile to construct. Take a 1,000-mile pipeline and you're looking at $5 to $10 billion before you pump the first barrel. That's before regulatory approvals, land acquisition, environmental studies, and the years of legal fights that now come standard with any major pipeline project in North America. Keystone XL, the pipeline that was proposed, approved, canceled, reapproved, and then killed for good in 2021, cost its developers over $8 billion in sunk costs before it was abandoned. They never moved a barrel of oil. That's a useful number to keep in mind when we talk about the risks. Here's where most people have the wrong mental model entirely. When the price of oil crashes, like it did in 2014 or in 2020, when oil briefly traded at negative $37 a barrel, you'd assume pipeline owners take a hit. Often, they don't. Because pipeline companies don't own the oil. They charge a fee to move it. The tariff. And that tariff is usually set by long-term contract, sometimes regulated by government, and almost completely disconnected from whatever oil is actually selling for on the spot market. It doesn't matter if oil is $30 a barrel or $130 a barrel. The pipeline owner gets paid either way. The dominant business structure for pipeline companies in the US is something called a Master Limited Partnership, or MLP. It's a publicly traded structure, specifically designed for this type of infrastructure, that passes most of its cash flows directly to investors without paying corporate income tax first. The result is a company that's built to distribute cash, reliably, quarter after quarter, to the people who own units in it. The big names here are Enbridge, Enterprise Products Partners, Kinder Morgan, and Williams companies. These aren't exciting businesses. They don't have viral moments. They don't announce revolutionary products. They just move hydrocarbons and write checks to shareholders. Enbridge alone operates about 17,000 miles of crude oil pipeline and about 107,000 miles of natural gas distribution network. In 2023, it generated roughly $14 billion in revenue. Think about what that actually means. $14 billion, mostly from charging fees on stuff moving through pipes in the ground. Stuff that was already in the ground anyway, built decades ago, largely paid off, running on physics and gravity in pump stations. This is the infrastructure the world runs on, and almost nobody talks about it. If that bothers you, subscribe. We cover it every week. So how does anyone actually own one of these things? At the institutional level, it's pension funds and infrastructure funds. Canadian pension funds, CPPIB, OMERS, the Ontario Teachers' Pension Plan, have been quietly buying pipeline and energy infrastructure assets for decades. They're ideal pension assets, long-lived, cash-generating, inflation-linked. When fuel prices go up, tariffs often go up with them, built right into the contracts. At the retail level, individual investors can own pipeline exposure through MLP units, ETFs, or shares in pipeline companies directly. And because of the MLMP structure, many of these assets pay yields of 5, 6, 7% annually, which in a world of low interest rates was genuinely extraordinary for an asset this stable. The problem is that stable and boring are not the same thing as safe. Pipeline companies are heavily leveraged. Building billions of dollars of infrastructure requires borrowing billions of dollars. Kinder Morgan, one of the largest pipeline operators in North America, had about $28 billion in long-term debt on its books, as recently as a few years ago. That's manageable when the cash flows are steady and interest rates are low. It becomes a very different conversation when rates rise or when a major contract isn't renewed. And the contracts. This is the thing that determines everything. A pipeline's value is almost entirely a function of what's flowing through it, under what terms, for how long. A pipeline with a 20-year take-or-pay contract with a creditworthy shipper, meaning the shipper pays the fee whether or not they actually send oil through, is a fundamentally different asset than a pipeline running on short-term agreements with customers who have options. Let's talk about what can actually go wrong, because this is where it gets interesting. Spills and accidents are the obvious one. The Dakota Access Pipeline had about 5 spills in its first year of operation. The Deepwater Horizon blowout cost BP over $65 billion in cleanup costs and legal settlements. A major pipeline spill doesn't just cost you the cleanup. It can freeze your operating permits across your entire network while regulators decide what to do with you. But the spill risk is manageable. The risk that's harder to manage is political. Keystone XL is the clearest example. A project that spent over a decade in permitting, survived multiple presidential administrations, and was eventually canceled not because it was technically flawed, but because the political cost of approving it became too high. $8 billion. Gone. The company, TC Energy, absorbed that loss and moved on. But it rattled the entire sector. The deeper issue is that pipelines are 42, 60-year assets being built in a world where energy policy can shift dramatically within a single presidential term. You're betting that oil will need to move through your specific route in meaningful volumes for the next half-century. That's not obviously a safe bet anymore. The energy transition is real. It's slow, but it's directional. And every major oil company on Earth is now publishing reports about when they expect peak oil demand. Here's the twist, though. Even in a world moving away from oil, natural gas pipelines are likely to be critical infrastructure for longer than most people assume. Gas is the backup fuel for power grids that depend on intermittent renewables. When the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine, Something has to spin the turbines. Right now, that something is mostly gas. So the pipeline business isn't dying tomorrow. It's just becoming a different calculation. What does the money actually look like on a functioning pipeline? Take a major crude oil pipeline carrying 500,000 barrels per day. That's a large but not exceptional volume for a U.S. trunk line. At a tariff of $2 per barrel, that's $1 million per day in revenue. $365 million a year. From one line. Operating costs for a pipeline are low relative to the revenue. You need pump stations, monitoring systems, maintenance crews, insurance, and regulatory compliance. A rough industry figure puts operating costs at 20 to 30% of revenue for a mature pipeline, so that $365 million in revenue might yield $250 to $290 million in operating income on infrastructure that, if it was built 30 years ago, has largely paid down its construction debt. That's the math that makes pension funds quiet and happy. A 30-year-old paid-off pipeline in a regulated corridor with long-term contracts is about as close to a guaranteed cash machine as any physical asset gets. The companies that own portfolios of those assets, Enbridge, Enterprise Products, trade at valuations that reflect exactly that. The flip side, a brand new pipeline, heavily leveraged, in a contested regulatory environment with short-term contracts and uncertain volumes, is a completely different risk profile. It's not that pipelines are safe assets. It's that old, contracted, deleveraged pipelines are safe assets. New ones are a bet. And sometimes, the bet doesn't pay. Here's what I keep coming back to with pipelines. The assets themselves are extraordinary, unglamorous, invisible, brutally efficient. A piece of steel in the ground that was put there in 1978 that has moved hundreds of billions of dollars worth of oil, that will probably still be moving oil in 2040. That's not a bad investment if you bought it at the right price, at the right time. The problem is that the right time was 40 years ago, and the right price required surviving the construction phase, the regulatory fights, the debt load, and the occasional political firestorm. The people who own these assets now mostly inherited them through acquisitions, corporate restructurings, and infrastructure fund roll-ups. They didn't build the pipelines. They bought the companies that built the pipelines, often when those companies were in trouble. That pattern: build something essential, nearly go bankrupt doing it. Sell it at a discount to someone with patient capital, who then collects cash flows for decades. Shows up in almost every major infrastructure category you can name. Airports, ports, power grids. The people who build infrastructure and the people who profit from it are rarely the same people. Subscribe now. The next video follows that exact same pattern, but in a place you've walked through, flown through, and probably complained about the parking at. In the next chapter, we'll focus on the business of airports. That's where you go through them. You pay the fees. You eat the $8 sandwich. But you've probably never wondered who the real owner of the building is, who controls the gates, and how a publicly funded piece of infrastructure quietly became one of the most profitable long-term assets on the planet. That's what we'll look at in the next video. See you there very soon.